values and cultures around the globe, all born out of a duty to serve. During her reign, the world has changed immeasurably, through the good times and the bad times, through war and peace, through boom and bust, through the advances in technology and communication and the dawn of the internet age. To many, she was a guiding light, ever present as she bore witness to the evolution of these islands into the modern era. A thread of continuity running through the fabric of the Commonwealth, at once tying societies to our shared histories and making new history. I, like many others in this chamber, was fortunate to meet the Queen on a number of occasions and was always struck by the strength, the intellect, the modesty, the humility, and often the humour with which she approached her royal duties. And while I have always met her in a professional context as monarch, I'm struck with just how many people across Scotland, and indeed across the United Kingdom, have had a first-hand encounter with the Queen. Whether they have been invited to her Holyrood garden parties or had the pleasure to meet with her in the many hundreds of events, walkabouts and official openings, including that at our Scottish Parliament, or whether she had taken them wholly by surprise with chance encounters on the countryside or villages near Balmoral, people the length and breadth of Scotland have their own tales of their individual meetings with the Queen. Because she was a monarch who reigned with compassion and integrity and established a deep connection with the public. And the affection which the Queen had for Scotland and that Scotland had for the Queen cannot be underestimated. On the Queen's first visit to Scotland following her coronation, the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland said to her, "Today, you and I are Scotland, greeting with all that we have to offer of love and duty our gracious young Queen." We can today look back on these words and say that for as long as Her Majesty reigned, both she and Scotland held true to these values of love and duty for one another. Speaking when she reconvened our Scottish Parliament in 1999, Her Majesty set out the obligation on members to set lasting standards of vision and purpose, of debate and discussion, not just for our own generation, but for future generations. And it is clear that members across the Scottish Parliament, and I trust in this place, from all walks of political life, have moved forward with that sense of vision and purpose in mind. There is a deeply held sense of responsibility across political parties to govern for the betterment of future generations. In our case, to uphold the values of the Scottish Parliament, which are inscribed in the ceremonial mace: wisdom, justice, compassion and integrity. The values that set the aspirations for a modern Scotland, the values that so often embodied by Her Majesty herself. And in what was sadly her final ever address to the Scottish Parliament, her love of Scotland and its people was clear, when she said, "It is the people that make a place, and there are few places where this is truer than it is in Scotland." The relationship between Scotland and the Queen was one of shared admiration. Indeed, whilst she was everyone's Queen, for many in Scotland, she was Elizabeth, Queen of Scots. Her Majesty's roots in Scotland run deep. She was descended from the Royal House of Stuart on both sides, and her family, of course, her mother, was from Glamis and Angus. It is clear that these family ties gave way to a great and enduring affection, and Scotland was a place that was truly held dear to her, not only in an official capacity, but in a private capacity as well. It is well known that Balmoral, with its beautiful and atmospheric scenery, was the Queen's favourite home. Balmoral was a place where she was able to enjoy freedom, peace and the ability to indulge her love of the great outdoors, whether that was walking with her dogs, riding with horses, hosting picnics and barbecues, or from behind the wheel of her Land Rover. It is clear that Balmoral has been a place of peace and sanctuary for her throughout her whole life, and perhaps particularly so following the death of her husband, life companion and love, His Royal Highness Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. It is therefore perhaps fitting that she has met her final peace at Balmoral, a place where she found such enjoyment and comfort. And as someone of demonstrably strong faith, she will now have enduring peace with herself and, of course, to be reunited with Prince Philip. Her Majesty was a life of grace and wisdom, defined by its service to the public and by the lives that she touched. Her legacy and her enduring presence will live on. God bless the Queen. May she rest in peace. God bless the King.
Boris Johnson. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope the House will not mind if I begin with a personal confession. A few months ago, the BBC came to see me to talk about Her Majesty the Queen, and we sat down and the cameras started rolling, and they requested that I should talk about her in the past tense. And I'm afraid I simply choked up, and I couldn't go on. I'm really not easily moved to tears. But I was so overcome with sadness that I had to ask them to go away. And I know that today there are countless people in this country and around the world who have experienced the same sudden access of unexpected emotion. And I think millions of us are trying to understand why we are feeling this deep and personal and almost familial sense of loss. Perhaps it's partly that she's always been there, a changeless human reference point in British life, the person who, all the surveys say, appears most often in our dreams, so unvarying in her pole-star radiance that we have perhaps been lulled into thinking that she might be in some way eternal. But I think our shock is keener today because we are coming to understand in her death the full magnitude of what she did for us all. And think of what we asked that 25-year-old woman all those years ago. To be the person so globally trusted that her image should be on every unit of our currency, every postage stamp, the person in whose name all justice is dispensed in this country, every law passed, to whom every minister of the Crown swears allegiance, and for whom every member of our armed services is pledged, if necessary, to lay down their lives. Think what we asked of her in that moment. Not just to be the living embodiment in her DNA of the history and continuity and unity of this country, but to be the figurehead of our entire system, the keystone in the vast arch of the British state, a role that only she could fulfill because in the brilliant and durable bargain of the constitutional monarchy, only she could be trusted to be above any party political or commercial interest and to incarnate impartially the very concept and essence of the nation. Think what we asked of her and think what she gave. She showed the world not just how to reign over a people, she showed the world how to give, how to love, and how to serve. And as we look back at that vast arc of service, its sheer duration is almost impossible to take in. She was the last living person in British public life to have served in uniform in the Second World War. She was the first female member of the royal family in 1,000 years to serve full-time in the armed forces, and that impulse to do her duty carried her right through into her 10th decade to the very moment in Balmoral, as my right honourable friend has said, only 3 days ago, when she saw off her 14th Prime Minister and welcomed her 15th, and I can tell you, in that audience, she was as radiant and as knowledgeable and as fascinated by politics as ever I can remember, and as wise in her advice as anyone I know, if not wiser. And over that extraordinary span of public service, with her naturally retentive and inquiring mind, I think, and doubtless many of the 15 would agree, that she became the greatest statesman and diplomat of all. And she knew instinctively how to cheer up the nation, how to lead a celebration. I remember her innocent joy more than 10 years ago after the opening ceremony of the London Olympics, when I told her that the leader of a friendly Middle Eastern country seemed actually to believe that she had jumped out of a helicopter in a pink dress and parachuted into the stadium. And I remember her equal pleasure on being told just a few weeks ago that she had been a smash hit in her performance with Paddington Bear. And perhaps more importantly, she knew how to keep us going when times were toughest. In 1940, when this country and this democracy faced the real possibility of extinction, she gave a broadcast, aged only 14, that was intended to reassure the children of Britain. She said then, "We know, every one of us, that in the end, all will be well." She was right. And she was right again in the darkest days of the COVID pandemic, when she came on our screens and told us that we would meet again. And we did. And I know I speak for other Prime Ministers when I say ex-Prime Ministers, when I say that she helped to comfort and guide us as well as the nation, because she had the patience and the sense of history to see that troubles come and go and that disasters are seldom as bad as they seem. And it was that indomitability, that humour, that work ethic and that sense of history which together made her Elizabeth the Great. And when I call her that, I should add one, Elizabeth the Great, I should add one final quality, of course, which was her humility. Her single-bar electric fire Tupperware using refusal to be grand. And unlike us politicians, with our outriders and our armour-plated convoys, I can tell you, as a direct eyewitness, that she drove herself in her own car with no detectives and no bodyguard, bouncing at alarming speed over the Scottish landscape to the total amazement of the ramblers and the tourists we encountered. And it is that indomitable spirit with which she created the modern constitutional monarchy. An institution so strong and so happy and so well understood, not just in this country, but in the Commonwealth and around the world, that the succession has already seamlessly taken place. And I believe she would regard it as her own highest achievement, that her son, Charles III, will clearly and amply follow her own extraordinary standards of duty and service. Yeah. And the fact that today we can say with such confidence, God save the King, is a tribute to him, but above all to Elizabeth the Great, who worked so hard for the good of her country, not just now, but for generations to come. That is why we mourn her so deeply, and it is in the depths of our grief that we understand why we loved her so much.
We now come to Mother of the House, RTUK.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and what an excellent speech from the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge, which I'm sure will have resonated in every member of this House and indeed everyone in this country. It was a brilliant speech. I'm grateful for the opportunity to pay my tribute to the Queen and to do so on my own behalf, but also on behalf of my constituents, particularly those who, coming from Commonwealth countries in Africa and the Caribbean, held the Queen in such high regard. We're a constitutional monarchy, and for we MPs, the Queen was ever present in the interwoven relationship between the monarch and her Parliament. She underpinned our democratic system for over 70 years, underpinning it but never intervening in it. She was always salient but never meddled. She avoided controversy not by staying in the background, far from it. She performed her role to the utmost, but she did it by respecting the boundaries. She carried out her duties and gave us her full commitment for us to carry out ours. When many denigrated, she always respected and supported Parliament, and we should be very grateful for that. Between her ministers, and not just Prime Ministers, there was regular contact. After Labour won the election in 1997, I went up to the palace where, like the other new Secretaries of State, she appointed me to the Privy Council and bestowed on me the seals of office. They are actual seals which are given to you and you take back to your department to be locked in a safe. But when just a year later I was sacked, and the seals taken out of the safe and taken back to Buckingham Palace, my diary was empty and my phone stopped ringing. My office was astonished to get a call from Buckingham Palace. No one else wanted to have anything to do with me, but the Queen wanted to see me. I was invited to take tea with the Queen for her to thank me for my service as Secretary of State. My point is that the relationship between our Queen and Parliament and our Queen and government was never just on paper, but was always active and always encouraging. She radiated British values of duty, patriotism, internationalism, charity and service. But while she embodied British values, she never intervened in politics. And that is constitutional alchemy, nothing less. It's evident that everyone, even those who don't agree with the hereditary principle of the monarchy, cannot but marvel at her personal qualities. And I want to marvel at how she could do all this flawlessly, not just over so many decades, but as a woman starting her reign in what was emphatically then a man's world. Yeah. We have to remember what attitudes were at the time. The order of the day was men were in charge and women were subservient. The man was head of the household and the role of a woman was to get married, have his children and support him. In the 1950s, when she was crowned, I was a child and I remember my mother warning me that people thought men knew more than women, that men's views were valuable, whilst women's were to be disregarded. And so it was in that atmosphere that she stepped up as a 25-year-old married woman with 2 children to take her place at the head of this nation and play a huge role on the world stage. What determination and courage that must have taken. Yeah. The prime ministers she dealt with were mostly men, mostly twice her age. Things were very different. A huge change has taken place during her reign. Things were very different when 6 years ago she threw open Buckingham Palace for us to celebrate the 70th anniversary of BBC's Woman's Hour, to celebrate how much women had achieved. As Sir Tony Blair said, she was the matriarch of this nation, a matriarch for us on the world stage, and a matriarch too at home in her own family. As well as being our monarch, she was the mother of 4 children, had many grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and it is to her family that I extend my deepest sympathies for their loss and condolences for their grief, which we all share.
Yeah. Theresa May.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is with great sadness that I rise to pay tribute to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, on my behalf and on behalf of my Maidenhead constituents. Yesterday was a day that we all knew would come sometime, but in our hearts of hearts, we hoped never would. But as we mourn a beloved monarch, we must always remember that she was a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother, and my thoughts and prayers are with King Charles III and the whole of the royal family. Yeah. And I also remember the close members of her royal household. Queen Elizabeth II was quite simply the most remarkable person I have ever met. I am sometimes asked, among all the world leaders I met, who was the most impressive? And I have no hesitation in saying that from all the heads of state and government, the most impressive person I met was Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. She gave a lifetime of service, as she promised to do when she was 21. Her selfless devotion to duty was an inspiration and example to us all. She was respected and loved, not just here in the United Kingdom and in her other realms and the Commonwealth, but across the world. And that love, respect and admiration was born not out of her position, but because of the person she was. A woman of dignity and grace, of compassion and warmth, of mischief and joy, of wisdom and experience, and of a deep understanding of her people. Like so many until last evening, I had never known another monarch. She was a constant throughout our lives, always there for us, uniting us at times of difficulty, and as others have said, most recently during COVID, when she gave us hope that we would once more come together. Her passing marks a generational change, not just because of the length of her service, but because of what she lived through. When we marked the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings in 2019, she was with the world leaders not just as Queen, but as someone who had worn uniform during the Second World War, an experience which, quite apart from anything else, had taught her how to strip an engine. The Queen was always interested in people. When she walked into a room, the faces of those present were lit up, and her magnificent smile would calm nerves and put people at their ease. As I said on her Platinum Jubilee, I saw that at Chogham in 2018, when there was a reception at Windsor before a lunch, and the leaders were gathered and talking amongst themselves, and I knew Her Majesty was going to join the reception, but they didn't. The minute she walked into the room, the sense of love and respect was palpable, and they all turned and they all wanted to speak to her. They loved her, and she loved the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth today is a significant part of her legacy. But I also saw that on other occasions, including on what was one of her last, if not the last, appearance she made in public, when she came to open Thames Hospice in my Maidenhead constituency in July. The moment she walked through the door, the atmosphere in the room changed. You felt the love and respect of the people there for her. And as she spoke to staff and patients, she exuded a warmth and humanity which put people at their ease. She was Queen, but she embodied us. Across the nations of the world and for so many people, meeting Queen Elizabeth simply made their day, and for many will be the memory of their life. Of course, for those of us who had the honour to serve as one of her Prime Ministers, those meetings were more frequent with the weekly audiences. These were not meetings with a high and mighty monarch, but a conversation with a woman of experience and knowledge and immense wisdom. They were also the one meeting I went to which I knew would not be briefed out to the media. What made those audiences so special was the understanding the Queen had of issues which came from the work she put into her red boxes, combined with her years of experience. She knew many of the world leaders. In some cases, she had known their fathers. And she was a wise and adroit judge of people. The conversations at the audiences were special, but so were weekends at Balmoral, where the Queen wanted all her guests to enjoy themselves. And she was a thoughtful hostess. She would take an interest in what books were put in your room, and she didn't always expect to be the centre of attention. She was quite happy sometimes to sit playing her form of Patience, while others were mingling around her, chatting to each other. My husband tells of the time he had a dream. He dreamt that he was sitting in the back of a Range Rover being driven around a Balmoral estate, and the driver was Her Majesty the Queen. and the passenger seat was occupied by his wife, the Prime Minister. And then he woke up and realised it was reality. Her Majesty loved the countryside, and she was down to earth and a woman of common sense. I remember one picnic at Balmoral which was taking place in one of the bothies on the estate. The hampers came from the castle and we all mucked in to put the food and drink out on the table. I picked up some cheese, put it on a plate and was transferring it to the table. The cheese fell on the floor. I had a split-second decision to make. I picked up the cheese, put it on the plate and put it on the table. And I turned round to see that my every move had been watched very carefully by Her Majesty the Queen. I looked at her, she looked at me, and she just smiled. And the cheese remained on the table. This is indeed a sad day. But it is also a day of celebration of a life well spent in the service of others. There have been many words of tribute and superlatives used to describe Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. But these are not hype. They are entirely justified. She was our longest-serving monarch. She was respected around the world. She united our nation in times of trouble. She joined in our celebrations with joy and a mischievous smile. She gave an example to us all of faith, of service, of duty, of dignity, of decency. She was remarkable, and I doubt we will ever see her like again. May she rest in peace and rise in glory.
Yeah. Sir Ed Davey.
It's a real pleasure to follow the Right Honourable Lady, and can I congratulate her on her lovely, heartwarming speech. Mr. Speaker, Liberal Democrats join members from all sides of the House in expressing our deepest condolences on the passing of Her Majesty the Queen. We are mourning a profound loss. The Queen was a formidable monarch who faithfully served our country for all her life and was loved the world over. She represented not only duty and courage, but warmth and compassion, and she was a living reminder of our collective past, of the greatest generation and their sacrifices for our freedom. For many people, myself included, Her Majesty was an ever-fixed mark in our lives. As the world changed around us and politicians came and went, she was our nation's constant. In challenging times, she was always a source of calm and comfort. And she tied our nations together, embodying an unwavering pride in our country, showing us that patriotism is not defined by political allegiance, and reminding us of the many things that bind us all together, even when it doesn't always feel that way. We saw this so vividly during the Platinum Jubilee celebrations in June. I'm proud to represent the oldest royal borough in England, Kingston upon Thames. And our Jubilee Street parties certainly lived up to that status. It was truly wonderful to see such an outpouring of affection from people across Kingston from all walks of life. School children who baked Jubilee cakes, neighbours who shared bunting, choirs who sang hymns of praise. And it was incredibly fitting, wasn't it? That after so long kept apart by COVID, it was the Queen and a celebration of Her Majesty's reign that brought our communities back together so joyfully. Just as the whole country is united today, so sadly, in grief. The deep mourning across the country now, just like the celebrations of her Jubilee a few months ago, comes not from a sense of duty, but from genuine and heartfelt affection, love and admiration of Her Majesty. It was not because we were her subjects, but because she was truly our Queen. What she meant to us is perhaps best summed up by a phrase on so many people's lips over the last 24 hours. I can't imagine our country without her. For almost everyone in our country, she has been there our whole lives. Times of national grief and national jubilation, she has never not been there for us. So it's hard to accept that she is gone, and hard to see how we go on without her. But we will. Our great United Kingdom has a great future, because the Queen's spirit of strength, grace and resolve lives on in her people. One of the greatest privileges of being a member of this House was the chance to meet Her Majesty. Like when she visited Kingston on the occasion of her Golden Jubilee, or when I was deeply privileged to sit next to her at lunch at Windsor Castle. I was initially confused by a silver cylinder beside her place-sitting. I wondered to myself what treasures it might hold. I had my suspicions when, as dessert was served, her beloved corgis were let in and nestled themselves around her feet. And the Queen lifted up the lid of the cylinder, plucked out some digestive biscuits, and began sneaking them to her grateful dogs. Whenever I met her, I was struck by her warmth, her wisdom, and her humour. And I'm looking forward to hearing similar stories from honourable and right honourable members across the House as they give glimpses of the wonderful person beneath the crown. Her Majesty will be remembered with honour as a monarch who guided our country out of the shadow of a terrible war, who helmed us calmly through troubled waters and brought us safely into a new millennium. And she will be remembered so fondly as the monarch who leapt from a helicopter with James Bond and showed Paddington where she kept her marmalade sandwiches. And for the royal family, she will be remembered simply as a beloved mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. Our thoughts, prayers, and condolences are with them all as they bear this terrible loss. After a lifetime of dedicated and tireless service to our country and our Commonwealth, Her Majesty has gone to her eternal rest. May God rest her soul, and may God save the King.
Yeah. Now come to Sir Ian Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful. So much.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.